So Richard Allen has been sentenced to 130 years for the murder of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. It is my sincere hope that this really brings closure to the families. As a survivor of violent crime and murder myself, it never really is that conviction that leads you to have that closure, but it does open the door to that process. And we're going to take a look at this. We're going to listen to a little bit of the press conference. I'm Collier Landry. Let's get into it. So as I said, Richard Allen has officially been sentenced in these murders, and we're going to listen to a little bit of WTHR. They're talking about what happened in the courtroom. I'm going to kind of go over that, and I'm going to explain my sort of analysis of all of this.
Felicia, I was inside the courtroom sitting right behind Richard Allen when the sentence was handed down by Judge Frances Gall. The judge said that in her words, she said to Richard Allen, "You rank right up there with the most hideous crimes that she has presided over in her 27 years as she's been presiding over criminal cases here in Indiana. For that reason, she sentenced Richard Allen to the maximum amount of time in prison that she could."
I mean, I agree. The nature of this crime was just horrific from Jump Street. I mean, this is back in 2017, Valentine's Day 2017. It's been almost 8 years for this family to get justice. I mean, this is something that, to me, again, as a survivor of violent crime, this is something that I think about a lot, because my father's trial was pretty swift, with inside of 6 months, and they got a conviction. This is almost 8 years and almost 5 years without actually having a suspect in custody. So I'm sure this is such a relief.
That she could, like you said, 130 years, 65 years for the murder of Abby Williams, 65 years for the murder of Libby German. She also told the court this morning that there was an extraordinary impact on the families of the two girls. She said it was a generational impact. That is actually a term that was...
Absolutely. The generational impact is what you have to always consider when looking at violent crime, murders, things like this, to just how this trickles down and affects people's psyche moving forward. I mean, this is something I talk about a lot on this show.
Coined by Libby's grandmother in speaking to the judge and in speaking to the courtroom, saying the impact of these murders is going to last for generations, not only for their family, but also for this community here in Carroll County. Judge Frances Gall said these families will deal with your carnage forever, as she looked directly at Richard Allen. At that point, she said, "You sit there and continue to just roll your eyes at me." And it was moments after that she announced the maximum sentence that she can impose. Now, we should point out there were actually 4 murder charges against Richard Allen, 2 for the murders of Abby, 2 for the murders of Libby. Under Indiana state law, an individual can only be sentenced for murdering an individual once. So therefore, counts 1 and 2, those were dismissed by the judge. Counts 3 and 4, again, account each of murder against Abby, and the murder of Libby. Those are what the judge ended up sentencing Allen for here this morning. He will now be assigned a public defender. The prosecutor, Nick McLeland, asked the judge to seal the autopsy photos and the crime scene photos moving forward. And those photos were a big part of this morning's hearing. The families of Abby and Libby really lashed out against the defense team.
Yeah, and here's the thing too, is that I remember when these photos were released, and I talked to Kelsey German on my show a year ago about this, and the nature of which people were releasing these photos, obsessing over this case. These types of things really affect the families, and that's the thing that I always try to talk about with you guys about violent crime in this situation and our general obsession with true crime, is that there are real people with real lives in these situations that we always have to consider. And having these photographs floating out, being behind paywalls that people are putting them on, all of these things are detrimental to the healing process that these families have to go through, that the survivors have to go through, the perpetrators' families have to go through, because they're not responsible for the actions of their loved one as well. And they have to deal with those ramifications, the friends, the family, the community as a whole. And that's something I always try to convey to you guys as my audience. But let's continue to listen.
Saying that they allowed through recklessness for those photos to be leaked online, causing tremendous harm to the families moving forward. And they asked the judge to really take that into consideration as well. The judge was able to take some mitigating factors into consideration when she handed down the sentences. She said that she would take into consideration that Richard Allen has no previous criminal history, but she said based on the heinous nature of the crimes, she did not give that a lot of weight. She did not give any weight to the circumstances involving what the defense had asked the judge to consider, his previous military service, and putting him behind bars would cause a hardship on his family and on Richard Allen's wife. The judge said any time that someone is put behind bars, that is a hardship to the family. So she would not take that into consideration.
I mean, yeah, and that's a great point. But I mean, again, he has a family, right? And they are not involved in this. And they get dragged into this mess. Look, I'm the son of a victim and a perpetrator. I know what this is like. This is awful, awful for everyone involved, that somebody commits a heinous crime like this. And now this stigma just carries through. And look, this is Delphi, Indiana. This is a very small community, small town, much like the one that I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio. So seeing this, it really resonates. Even when they're showing them walking into the courthouse, it looks like downtown Mansfield to me. I mean, this is in Indiana. It's one state over from where I grew up. So again, this is something to consider when we consume these types of content and when we talk about it, about the community impact of all of this.
She did say simply the horrific nature of the crimes really played a big impact in her decision to give the maximum 130 years. Now, before the judge announced her sentence, we did get to hear from family members of the victims. We heard from Carrie Timmons, that is Libby's mother. She said that this has been absolute hell for Abby and Libby's families and friends over the last 8 years. She said she was left with a literal hole in my soul. She said she still struggles daily with guilt and anxiety. And she said, and I'll quote here, "I'll never understand how you were able to get away with this for so long," speaking directly to Richard Allen.
I mean, that's the thing, is it's very tough when you're a survivor of violent crime. And, something I struggled with for a long time is the guilt over my mother's murder, even though there was nothing I could have done about it. And I did everything possible after that murder occurred to get my father caught. And obviously he did. And when it was tried and convicted and my family ultimately got justice, and I got justice for my mother, but it still leaves a hole in your soul because you just kind of go through the coulda, woulda, shoulda. I mean, I was 11, so it's different. But again, there's no control you have over the actions of other people, right? And this violent act happening to these two beautiful young souls it's gut-wrenching, and it's gut-wrenching to a mother and to a family and to a community that has suffered through this.
The grandparents of both Abby and Libby also spoke to the court, at times speaking directly to Richard Allen. They said that they cannot forgive him at this point, that they hope in the future they'll be able to find that forgiveness. But right now they still sit with a tremendous amount of pain that they say will never go away. We will certainly have much more about what was said in court, about very powerful impact statements. We are expecting perhaps for the families to come out and speak with the media. We know that Indiana State Police are going to speak with the media. We expect the prosecution team to speak to the media now that Judge Francis Gall has lifted what has been a gag order for more than a year. At the very end of the hearing this morning, she said that she was officially lifting that gag order, which means now that we can hear from the parties in the case, the prosecution, the defense, the families who have not been able to speak to us.
And that's got to provide some relief, right? The families can now speak their minds about all of this, and and hopefully, again, this all prepares them for a process of healing. And as far as forgiveness, that's such a challenge to go through and to reconcile. I mean, it's so fresh. I can remember when the judge in my father's trial talked to me about forgiveness of my father, which I ultimately did forgive my father because I realized it was more beneficial to me and my healing process than about forgiving him for his actions. So when you think about that, again, it's a process. It starts today. They've gotten their sentencing. And hopefully this can set them on the path to healing, because you never really get closure, but you ultimately do kind of reconcile with what happened, and hopefully they take this as a fresh start to their healing process.
Throughout the course of this trial, and really from all throughout
in the courtroom
Yes.
when the sentence was handed down.
Certainly not any reaction of surprise at all. The families did ask for Judge Gall to impose the maximum sentence, which is exactly what she did.
I mean, 130 years. I mean, that's just setting a precedent. I mean, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to, I believe, 134 years. Keith Raniere was sentenced to 150 years. I mean, handing down these significant sentences to these evil people is I think very necessary.
I think a lot of legal observers and those of us who have been following this case all along expected that maximum sentence to be handed down. There was no reaction whatsoever from Richard Allen or from the defense team. The defense team, Felicia, didn't really say anything. They submitted a memo a couple days ago. They told the judge, we're going to let that memo speak for itself. And in that memo, they said, we're not really going to spend a lot of time trying to convince you to limit the sentence, because at this point, the defense team is putting their stock in the appeals process. They say we are going to appeal, and at appeal, we expect that we will get a fair appeal. They've accused throughout the trial the judge of not being impartial.
I mean, always accusing, the defense side. I mean, this is their job, right? They'll fight it out on appeal. This is what will happen. And I know that there's a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this case, but this was a conviction, and this is a sentencing, and we'll see how this plays out in the court process.
And they believe that they may have a better chance to be able to get all of this reversed once the case does go to the Indiana Court of Appeals.
Okay, we did know yesterday that they did not plan to speak. They did not plan to offer any words. Have there been any signs of remorse from Richard Allen throughout this process? You've been in the courtroom since day one.
Yeah, this is interesting.
So it's a good question, Felicia, because, we heard during the trial that Richard Allen, in speaking with the psychologist at the prison, and in some of the things that he wrote to the warden and said to some of the guards and other inmates in prison, according to statements that he made, confessions, he wanted to apologize to the family.
I mean, this is something that I always... these apologies and all these things, these are just, in my opinion, very hollow and very self-serving, because it makes them feel better. I'm sorry that I made you feel this way. I'm sorry that I did what I did and it's impacted your life. It's like, no. And I don't think the family is in any position to want to hear any sort of, this was not an accident. This is not like he ran a stop sign and killed someone, you know what I mean? Or wasn't paying attention, or something tragic happened like that. This was a chilling and horrific case and brutal murder of these two young women. So apologies, in my opinion, again, as a survivor of both a victim and the perpetrator, and as someone who's gone through this, yeah, save it. I don't want to hear it.
So far, there has been no apology. And in fact, Richard Allen and his defense team maintain that he is innocent, that he did not commit these crimes. And despite more than 60 incriminating statements that he made behind bars, they say those statements were coerced. They say that he was suffering from psychosis at the time that he made those statements, and that he did not commit these crimes. Of course, a jury determined otherwise, and they believe the state's position that Richard Allen was thinking clearly when he made all of those statements. So whether those statements should have even been admitted at all and presented to the jury, that's one of the issues that we expect Richard Allen's defense team will bring up on appeal.
Well, there you have it. They're going to let this play out in the appeals court. Again, Richard Allen has been sentenced to 130 years for the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. I want to take this moment to thank you for listening, but I want to reflect on this. This is something that, again, this healing process can now begin for these families, for the community of Delphi, Indiana. But, this is still a loss. It is a loss for everyone. I always talk about this with violent crime, murders, things like this, is that everyone loses. Everyone loses. A family loses loved ones. The perpetrator loses loved ones. A community is rattled to its core. And the lens of the nation and the world has been tuning into this. I've been hearing about this case for years and years. We're talking about, it has been almost 8 years since these murders occurred, and the town was terrorized, and the community and the surrounding communities of Delphi, Indiana was terrorized for almost 5 years before Richard Allen was actually apprehended. So again, and conspiracy theories were, running rampant online, a lot of conjecture, but let's not forget this. There are two families that need to heal, that need our respect and our love and our prayers. So please keep them in mind. And also the families of the perpetrator and those of the community, all of those people, everyone needs to be in our thoughts and prayers. It's time to heal. It's time to move forward. And that's why you guys listen to me, because I provide this perspective. Anyways, I'm Collier Landry. Here's the outro. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support today's program, please click the links in the description of the show notes of today's episode. And if you like this video, check out this one right here or this one right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe because it helps with the algorithm. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see y'all on the next one.
Good girl, Marisol. Good girl.